Midday Magazine with John Dixon on WQSC 1340 and AM 950, The Voice.
Welcome back to the Midday Magazine. I'm John Dixon. It's AM 1340 and 950, The Voice. And my guest today, see if he's there. George. Nope. All right, I'm going to tap dance a little bit here while we try to reconnect with my guest from Mullins, my hometown. And let's see. What can we talk about? And I mean, we're trying to get George Magera on the line from Mullins. And George, I know he's a World War II veteran and kind of a historian of the town of Mullins. And so I always like talking to George because he has a lot of history of the town. And let's see if we got now. Once again, my guest today is a gentleman that I've known as long as I can remember. He was the first individual I ever connected with the radio business when I was a kid. I'm delighted to welcome Mr. George Magera to the Midday Magazine. Welcome, George.
Well, hi, John. It's good to hear you, and thank you so much for having me. And I certainly hope that the Nielsen Rating Service is not conducting ratings down there today, because if they are, you're going to go down.
You think it's going to go down? I think it's going to be a great segment. I've really looked forward to having you on the show. And, before we get into your radio career, it's a rare privilege, George, to speak with a World War II veteran, so let's begin there. Did your interest in electronics begin during the war, or did it predate the war?
Well, it more or less predated it. I started getting into electronics when I was in high school. Mm-hmm. I just, had an urge to do it, and I remember building a one-tube radio for a science fair that we had, and from there on, that's really how I got started. And then when I got into the Navy, it really took off.
So what did you do in the Navy regarding electronics?
Well, during World War II, there were three things I really wanted to do. I wanted to shoot a machine gun, and I wanted to get into radio, and I wanted to fly. And a friend of mine says, well, you know what? They need radio gunners on TBF Avengers. So I got interviewed for that, and fortunately for me, when I went to take the physical, it snowed in Sansom, New York, and the sun came out, and I had temporary color blindness. Well, one of the sailors that was interviewing, he noticed I played a trombone in the band. So he said they were looking for musicians in a new rank called sonar, which was anti-submarine work, and this is what I did in the Navy. Sent me from Sansom, New York, down to Key West, Florida. It was like going from, well, I don't want to use the word, but I ended up in heaven.
Were you out on ships listening for submarines?
Yeah, we did. I was on a destroyer escort, and it was about 300 and some feet long. It was a trim but deadly ship. But what we did, we were in front of the convoys and wherever the fleet was, the battleships or whatever, and we scanned with our sonar for enemy submarines. And usually we had 3 or 4 ships that encircled the fleet, and that's what we did. We were out in the front, pinging, so to speak.
Fascinating. Did you ever ferret out any enemy subs or U-boats?
Well, it's a good question. The Navy would not take your word for it unless you brought back some bodies or parts of submarines. Mm-hmm. And this we never did do, and I hate to say that, but we feel like we had several of them, in our range, and we dropped our depth charges, but you just have to bring back evidence.
Well, you are originally from up north. What brought you to the small rural South Carolina town of Mullins?
Well, that's really a good question. I graduated from Capital Engineering in Washington, D.C. In 1950, and I was headed for Fort Wayne, Indiana. My best friend went to Indiana Tech, and he was getting married, and at that time, John, Fort Wayne, Indiana was more or less the electronic capital of the United States. And so, anyhow, we had our graduation banquet in Washington, And I lived in a 3-story rooming house, and on the way down, we were going out to celebrate in Washington, D.C., and the phone rang. And that's how close I came to missing the call to come to the beautiful South. Anyhow, I picked it up, and it was a friend that I knew in school that had come down here, and they put this new radio station on the air, and they had a used transmitter. And anyhow, he taught me into coming down to help them. They were having problems with it. So I said, okay, I'll come down, but I'm only going to be there 6 months because it was not my aspiration to be living in the South, I can tell you. And the reason I say that
Famous last words, right?
I met a couple of unsavory characters from the South when I was in the Navy. And being young, I based my total impression of the South on just a few individuals. Well, I got down here, and I wasn't here a week, and I called my mother, and I said, I'm staying in the South. The people just treated me that good.
Well, George, wasn't it almost an accident that you were first thrust in front of a microphone at WJAY?
Oh, it was a total accident. My field was really engineering, and I didn't have any specialized treatment in the world of really broadcasting. And, well, it's a long story, but anyhow, when it was time to open up on my very first day at WJAY, nobody showed up. And Bill Goss Smith, one of your neighbors, by the way.
Absolutely, my across the street neighbor.
I don't know if you remember them or not, but he thought we should open up at 3:30 in the morning, which was kind of ridiculous, but we did. And I got out there, and believe it or not, nobody was there. So I turned everything on with the help of another friend, and we got started, and I got records out. Well, then the fireworks started, because it was all hillbilly and Western, and I had this okay, you skies accent from South Philadelphia, and I don't think it went over too well.
Well, but by the end of the day, I heard that there was originally a negative reaction from Bill Goss Smith, who owned the station, but then he kind of turned around.
You don't want me to tell you what he said.
No, we do have the FCC probably listening in. We don't want to. It's probably along the lines of get that GD Yankee off my radio station, probably, right? Something close to that?
That was it, John. He called up. He did not know I was there. And that's exactly what he said. He wanted to know who that GD Yankee was on his radio station.
Now, but of course, what made him change his mind by the end of the day?
Well, at that particular time, everything was mandated by the government when it came to communications and radio, and it was required that you had to have a first-class engineer on duty at all times, or at least available. And so I just went and got my license off the wall and took it down and started walking out. And the manager, he said, wait a minute, where are you going? I says, well, that man that owns this station doesn't like me too well, so I'm heading back north. And he made a phone call, and I had a nice chat with Bill Goss, and we became very close friends after that.
Well, that kind of put you in the catbird seat, or at least made you indispensable by having that engineer's license. That's what it was, right?
Right. Well, that's true. And back in those days, it was necessary to have that. But that's a whole other story about the FCC doing away with that. But anyhow, we became good friends, and I ended up doing broadcasting, and I loved it, and did it for 13 years.
Well, George, on Facebook, I've seen many old photographs posted of country and western artists in the studios of WJAY, and I say country and western. Nobody says country and western anymore. It's just country, but back then, it was country and western because everybody was dressed like Gene Autry.
That's true. That's true, and that's really the name that they went by. But we were just a small country station, and believe it or not, it's like you would see in those old movies. We would have these country and western stars to stop by and drop records off and promote whatever they had going on at the time. And I don't remember. There were several of them that came by. The only one I remember is Arthur Smith, if you ever heard of him.
Oh, yeah, I sure remember Arthur Smith.
Okay, I think he was a great fiddler, or if I'm not mistaken.
He had a TV show, and he
had a good group.
He had a TV show, George. Remember, he had an alter ego called, was it Cousin Ugly or Uncle Ugly or something?
Yeah, right. I remember that. That really goes back in time.
Now, George, your career in radio and mine seem to run parallel in the way that we've both worn many different hats. For instance, I've done classic country shows, I've done top 40 shows, I've done beach music shows, I've done produced talk music shows. So I've done a lot of different things. And what are the different types of programs you've been involved with during your 13 years at WJAY? I bet it kind of ran the gamut, didn't it?
Well, it did, and at first I had a struggle because I really had this bad South Philadelphia accent. But one of the things in my favor was the fact that I used to tell people that, where are you from? And I would say, I'm from south of Philadelphia, and try to use my little bit of Southern accent. But anyhow, I practiced very hard with the recorder to get rid of that, and ended up with my basic show, which was called Yawn at Dawn, and probably a little before your time.
Yawn at Dawn?
Yawn at Dawn was the name of it. And I had a couple-hour show in the morning, and I introduced into this area big band music because I came from the area where big band music was prevalent.
Sure.
And it was, in the beginning, I think, a little bit hard for the people to, really get used to that. But once they did, the show caught on, and we started having advertisers coming, and, of course, being in radio now, that's an important thing.
Oh, yeah.
And the program just took off, and I was able to handle it for about 13 years. But I did a lot of different things in radio when I was at the radio station. I don't know. Do you remember Mamie Lee Smith?
Of course I remember Mamie Lee. That's my across-the-street neighbor, and, she had two sons that were a little older than me, so I was only over there long enough until they ran me off. But I loved Mamie Lee. She was a very special character. She didn't get mad at me when I dumped all the fish food in the aquarium and killed all of her fish. She was very nice to me and forgiving, but I loved Mamie Lee.
She was really a great lady, John, and she would call me once in a while when I was on the air. And, she had different little hints and tidbits that I would, put over the air. She would tell them to me on the phone. And it gave me the idea of, she would make a good 15-minute segment, like you're doing. And I asked her one time if she'd be interested in that. Well, at the time I was in ham radio. And I said, well, I'm going to build a phone patch, which was nothing but a couple of 500-ohm transformers with an all-off switch that you could switch from phone to mic. And it was nothing automatic about it, but it worked very well for us, and she got used to it. But we put on a 15-minute segment called Through the Kitchen Window. Do you remember that name?
I remember that from the little video you put on Facebook.
Okay.
What was really funny that you told me is that before you put in that phone patch, you would have these conversations with Mamie Lee, and people could not hear her on the phone. She would talk to you, and you would have to repeat her question or her comment and then respond to it.
Right. And, I think really we might have been a little ahead of our time because I don't want to say that we created talk radio, but we sure did get into it before anybody else, with real live broadcast. And, it worked out fairly well. And it was basically the same with the churches. We used to, it bothered me that the shut-ins and a lot of our good listeners, especially the older people, weren't getting to church. And I told the manager, I said, you know what? I said, back then there was a lot of surplus equipment available. And I said, why don't I go ahead and buy? I found out that there were some intercom amplifiers from B-24 bombers in World War II. I said, why don't I get one of those and see what I can do to convert it, which I did, and put a couple of 500-ohm transformers in that. And anyhow, I did convert one, and it really did work well. We hooked a mic Canon plug in the front and took it down to it was the Presbyterian Church in Mullins, and we tried it out, and it worked great. Well, we, needless to say, really got some rave reviews about that. So I bought 6 of these amplifiers. One was a spare, and converted them all and put them in the main churches in Mullins and Marion. And that's how we got the first broadcast from our churches locally on Sunday.
Now, George, I want to tell you a story that I've never told you, and it's how I first got interested in radio. You remember the Western Auto Store? There was a black man by the name of Willie who used to work there, and I used to think Willie was perpetually stooped by this humongous crucifix he wore around his neck. Now, Willie would fix bicycles. He'd fit my flat tire anytime my bike broke. Willie would fix it. He was your bike fix-it guy at the Western Auto Store. Well, when I heard about this, I could not believe it, so I had to go out to my car. I cut church at the Baptist church, and I went out and sat into my car, well, it wasn't my car, my dad's car, of course, and cut it on to WJAY, and there was Willie, the fix-it bike guy, who was transformed into Prophet Page on the airwaves.
Is that, you know what? You're not going to believe this, John, but back then, I had extra time, from the radio station. I was on call all the time. But do you know that I opened the first radio shop at the Western Auto Store, and that's how I got into the radio and TV business.
I didn't know that.
Carl Trueluck and I both put up $25, and I had a shop in the back of the Western Auto. And a lot of the radios were battery operated because there still was not some electricity in areas of this, out in Erie County,
right,
for instance. But, I was there for, I guess about a year. And then I moved. I had another fellow approach me about he was wanting to go. See, we didn't have TV at the time. And that was another plus that I had at radio, because people didn't have TV to watch.
Absolutely. Well, George, that was the thing when I was listening. I started thinking about this theater of the mind, how Willie, the genial bike fix-it guy during the weekdays, could be transformed in the fiery Prophet Page on Sundays. That was really interested me, and it stayed in my mind. And that was my first time I thought, hey, maybe this is something I would enjoy doing. Now, here's something I want to move on to, though. Nowadays it's common to do remote broadcasts, and we have these tidy little compact units called Comrex or tie-line units. Back when I first started in radio in the 80s, there were these what we call Marty units, where you'd go and you could make, these remote broadcasts, and it would have air broadcast quality. But I imagine when you did that, it was a huge amount of equipment, and the story of you taking a trunk full of equipment to Myrtle Beach with Hurricane Hazel rolling in is fascinating to me.
Well, here again, I think we were once again ahead of our time. But when the hurricane came, did you know Forrest Ramsey?
Yes.
Forrest was our manager. He came about a year after I did. And anyhow, he was a ham operator also. And we got to talking one day, and we knew the hurricane was coming, and we both had ham radio stations, and I had one in my car. And so I said, you know what, why don't we set up out here, and I'll go to the beach in the car and do some remote broadcasting. Do you think it'll work? So we set up the transformers, got everything hooked into the patch panel, and got the radio station out, the ham station out there, and I took off for the beach during the hurricane. Well, I think we broadcast on 40 meters on one of the ham bands anyhow, but it worked out extremely well.
For folks that don't remember, Hurricane...
People were, kind of amazed that we did this, and of course I was in my glory because I was just having a big time down at the beach in all this wind and rain. Finally, the police got after me. They wanted to know what in the world was I doing. They had never seen anything like that. I said, well, I'm broadcasting to our radio station in Mullins, South Carolina, WJAY, and Well, they said, you can't do that. You've got to get out of here. So I was ushered out in kind of a hurry.
Well, you know, for folks that don't remember, Hurricane Hazel just literally tore up the Grand Strand, and it was the most destructive hurricane of the 20th century, along with Hurricane Hugo.
Well, it really did. It was terrible.
Now,
and it was so bad up here also.
Now, George, you've been married to your lovely, sweet wife, Nancy, for how many years now?
I better get this right.
Yeah, you better.
Sitting on the couch with my computer listening, and it's 58 years, Nancy. That we know.
She give you the thumbs up on that, 58? Well, you know, Miss Nancy worked in the office of the tobacco warehouse that my dad was a partner in, and where I worked every summer from age 10 to 17. And back then, Mullins was not just another sleepy rural southern town. It was the premier spot in the state to grow and sell tobacco, the state's #1 cash crop at the time. And that little town would practically hum with activity during the summer. And one of my strongest childhood memories, George, is the warm, burnished aroma that filled the entire town in the summer, with all of the cured tobacco being brought into warehouses for auction.
You're right about that, John. And do you notice the number of people that say that very same thing on Facebook about, missing the aroma
the
in
smell.
town?
The smell.
And when I first came in 1950, I had never experienced anything like that. And I could not get over. This town would increase in population by maybe 10,000 during the tobacco season. And it just amazed me that it was. It's hard to describe. It was just fantastic. They had this big parade. I mean, it was a huge one, and I'm sure you remember it.
Sure.
But Main Street would be so crowded, there would just be enough room for the parade contendants to go down the street.
It was such an exciting time of the year because the smell was the smell of money. It was the smell of money.
It's unbelievable. And now, and I look and see on TV where, you can't even light up cigarettes in some towns. I think it was Conway that the city council just passed some sort of an ordinance about it.
You can't even smoke outdoors? Wow.
Well, I don't remember which town it was, but me, I do a lot of story writing and a lot of posting. Hello?
Hello.
We're still there?
Yeah, we're still here.
Okay. It's just technology is cutting in on us, John.
Well, we're about to wrap it up here, and I want to thank you, first of all, George, for your service in World War II. And on a personal note, my dad thoroughly enjoyed your company in the last years of his life when he would drive up to Mullins from the beach and meet everyone at the Dry Dock restaurant. And my dad may have moved to the beach in the mid-'80s, but he never stopped loving his hometown, and I'm sure he enjoyed being around a veritable repository of the town's history like yourself.
Well, we miss him, John. There's no question about it, and I miss all those people that I grew up with. There's just not many of us left. But your dad was one in particular, and we just enjoyed seeing him come to Mullins on those certain days, and meeting at the Dry Dock.
Right.
He thoroughly enjoyed it also.
I know he did. Well, George, thank you so much for your time today. It's been a pleasure to talk to you, and tell Nancy I said hello, and it was just a great moment here, a great segment here, a special moment for me just to talk to somebody such as yourself from my hometown.
Well, thank you so much, John. And for your information, Nancy just put her head in the door and shook in agreement when you said that about her.
Oh, well, thank you very much, George. You take care now.
Thank you.
All right, bye-bye.